Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the stories and please subscribe. I worked part-time for one of those food delivery businesses in a quiet Cleveland suburb, where the most thrilling event was the annual 4th of July fireworks. That night, I got a ping for a big order from Tony's Pizzeria, a local spot famous for its extra cheesy pies. I grabbed the boxes, their heavenly scent filling my car, and checked the app for the delivery address. A cul-de-sac on the outskirts of town. No big deal. I'm the kind of guy who likes to push the speedometer a bit, you know what I mean? More speed, more deliveries, more cash. But that night, fate had other plans. As I turned onto the block leading to the cul-de-sac, my rearview mirror exploded with the disco lights of doom, red and blue. I pulled over, cursing my luck. The cop ambled over and handed me a ticket that cost more than I'd make that whole night. Great. But hey, the pizza wasn't going to deliver itself. So I sped off and I finally reached the cul-de-sac. And man, it was creepy. There were no streetlights, just the dim glow from the windows of the 3 houses that made up this dead end. The house I was delivering to looked like it had been forgotten by time. Peeling paint, overgrown lawn, the whole 9 yards. I knocked hard on the door, no doorbell of course, and waited. The door creaked open, and there he was. A heavy-set balding guy with a long grayish beard wearing a stained undershirt. His eyes were shifty, his posture slouched. He looked like he'd been marinating in a cocktail of bad decisions. "How you doing?" he slurred, his breath a toxic mix of alcohol and regret. He insisted I come in and said he had a tip for me. My gut was screaming no, but the thought of that ticket made me override common sense. I stepped inside just as I heard a car pull into the cul-de-sac. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach churn. He led me into a kitchen that looked like a dumping ground for dirty dishes and shattered dreams. He told me to wait, then disappeared downstairs to the basement, the sound of his footsteps fading like my hopes for a decent tip. The kitchen was a disaster zone, a place where hygiene and order had long since surrendered. The linoleum floor was stained and sticky, like it had been the stage for a food fight involving spaghetti sauce and soda. A chipped Formica table stood in the center, cluttered with a mishmash of old newspapers, empty beer cans, and a couple of dirty plates that looked like they'd hosted last week's dinner. Then I heard it. A crash, followed by a muffled cry. "You okay?" I shouted, my voice tinged with a fear I couldn't hide. A groan echoed from down the stairs, which were shrouded in darkness so thick it felt like wading through tar. I reached where I expected a light switch to be, but found nothing. Turning on my phone's flashlight, I slowly descended the creaky stairs, hating every minute of this. My gut told me to turn around and split, but I also knew I'd feel guilty leaving this guy injured on the floor. And honestly, I still wanted my tip. Halfway down, the moaning stopped. Dead silence. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A soft crunch, like someone stepping on gravel. Then a loud knock. My heart leapt into my throat. I sprinted back up, flung the front door open, and there was the cop who'd ticketed me. He was holding some papers, my car's registration and insurance that he'd left on his dashboard. But before I could even thank him, I blurted out that something was really wrong here. I led him to the staircase and he drew his gun, cautiously making his way down. I waited, my chest pounding. Then chaos. Shouting, scuffling, and finally a gunshot. The cop yelled for me to come down. When I did, I found him cuffing the old dude, who was now howling in pain. As I looked around, I almost wrenched. The basement was a chamber of horrors, a place where nightmares were born and thrived. The air was thick with the stench of mold and something far worse: decay. The walls were lined with rusty, medieval-looking tools that seemed more suited for torture than any practical use. Chains dangled from the ceiling, their ends fitted with cuffs that had clearly seen use. But what really got me were the photographs. Pinned to a corkboard were dozens of pictures, each one featuring a different person, all appearing terrified. Their eyes screamed for help that never came. It was like looking into the faces of the damned. A table in the corner was cluttered with what looked like personal belongings: wallets, keys, cell phones, mementos from previous victims, maybe. And then there were the cages. Small, cramped spaces barely big enough for a human to curl up in. One was open, its door ajar, as if someone was about to be put in. The floor beneath it was stained a dark, an unsettling color that I didn't want to think about. The cop saw my face and didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We both knew we'd stumbled onto something evil, something that couldn't be easily explained or forgotten. The sick freak was hauled off, still screaming, his cries echoing in the night like a wounded animal. The cop told me they'd be back to investigate further, but honestly, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface. I drove away, my hands trembling on the wheel, my mind racing. I would never forget the images, the smells, the sheer terror of that place. So do you still think delivering food is a chill job? Think again, because you never know what's waiting for you at the end of a dark cul-de-sac. Last summer, I was back home working at Mama Lucia's, the only Italian pizzeria in our dying little town. As a college student, this was my summer gig, and on weekends I worked the graveyard shift from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. The team was small. Frank, who was the manager and chief cook, Maria, who handled the orders, and me, the delivery guy. Late one Saturday night, around 2 a.m., an order for 2 margarita pizzas came in. The delivery address was this house way out in the boonies, deep within the woods, about 10 minutes outside town. Late-night deliveries were typical on weekends, so I thought nothing of it. I climbed into my rust-bucket Toyota Camry, my clothes stinking of pizza dough, and turned onto the main highway, which ran through the center of town. At this hour, the streets were mostly deserted, with only an occasional street lamp piercing the darkness. A few miles outside town, I turned off the main drag onto the smaller, unlit streets. The weak headlights from my car provided the only light. It wasn't long before I came upon the unpaved gravel road with a private property sign prominently displayed on a wooden fence post at the entrance. I believed I had found my destination. I drove slowly along the dirt road since it was nearly pitch black, with only a sliver of moonlight poking through the thick trees that dotted each side. I was barely 75 yards in when a loud bang reverberated through the car, followed by a flapping noise and a noticeable drop in handling. A quick look confirmed my suspicion. My front right tire was flat. Just great, I thought, wondering how I'd get help way out here at this hour. But first, I needed to get rid of these pizzas, so I started walking along the dirt road towards a faint glimmer of light in the distance. I soon came upon an unassuming single-story ranch house. It was almost entirely dark except for the single bulb hanging from the awning extending over the front door. I could just make out the soft glimmer of lights peeking out from the bottom of the blinds that covered the windows. When I knocked on the door, an ordinary-looking guy who called himself Jacob answered. After handing him the pizzas, I explained my flat tire predicament. He looked concerned, grabbed a flashlight, and offered to walk back to my car with me. When he reached it, he began examining the tire, shaking his head and shrugging his shoulders, appearing as perplexed as I was about what could have caused it. Meanwhile, I explored the area, puzzled about what I had hit that flattened the tire. Then I noticed a glint of a reflection in the moonlight. As I walked closer, it turned out to be a spike strip lying across the road a few yards behind my car. I could think of no good reason for it to be there other than Jacob deliberately placing it there. My nerves screamed at me to leave, but I forced myself to walk back to the car, appearing casual, my mind frantically concocting a plan. I told Jacob I hadn't found anything, and it was too dark anyway to continue looking. I feared he might be suspicious, but he mumbled, "Don't worry about it," and turned and said he was heading inside to gather some tools. I decided not to wait to find out what he meant by tools. As soon as he reached his front door, I got back into my car, started the engine, and reversed, making sure to avoid the spike strip this time. As I drove towards the paved road, I heard footsteps on the gravel and glanced in the rearview mirror. My eyes widened as I saw Jacob running down the dirt road after me, what looked like a crowbar gripped tightly in his right hand. I was only driving 10 to 15 miles per hour to prevent further damage to the wheel, but thought, to hell with this, and pressed down harder on the accelerator. I exited the dirt road onto the paved street and turned right, heading back towards the main highway. Every few seconds, glancing in the rearview mirror to see if Jacob was still in pursuit. My heart pounded as I pushed my old Toyota to its limits. Still, a part of my mind couldn't help but spiral into panic, wondering what Jacob was up to. I cringed at the thought of the damage to my wheel, but once I merged onto the main highway, I reduced my speed and tried to will myself to calm down. Keeping my speed in check, it took about 20 minutes to get back to Mama Lucia's. While still a little shaken up, I was starting to relax. Recounting my harrowing ordeal to Frank and Maria, I saw shock register on their faces, unsure of what to make of all this. Since our shift was ending, Frank recommended a slow, steady drive home to deal with the flat tire later. As I slowly pulled out onto the main highway, my paranoia spiked as I noticed a car trailing me in the darkness, its headlights off. What the hell, I thought. Could this be the same dude that flattened my tire with the spike strip? I decided to pull off the main highway a couple of blocks before my street. The car following me made the turn as well. Now I was totally freaking out. Whoever it was, I didn't want them following me home, so I pulled over to the curb to see if the other car would do the same. And it did, just a little further down the road. At this point, I completely lost it. With trembling hands, I decided to call the police. As I waited, I sat totally still, my eyes straining to see if anyone climbed out of the car parked just ahead. When a police vehicle arrived on the scene, he pulled up next to me and rolled down his window. I explained that I thought I was being followed and pointed to the car in question. Suddenly, it roared to life, racing away into the black void. The police car bolted after it, sirens screaming into the night. I found myself praying that whoever was driving that car would be apprehended. I was alone again, trying to get my breathing back to normal as I listened to the siren fade into the distance. Unfortunately, the events of that night have never been resolved. Did the police ever catch up with that driver? I never found out. Frank added Jacob's address to the Do Not Deliver blacklist. I quit Mama Lucia's about a month later. I was done being a delivery driver, at least for now.
It was during the pandemic that I started using those food delivery apps, having learned how much I hated going out in public. It was just another dull day, and I was beat from work. Like dead tired. So I did what any sane person or lazy person would do. I ordered food from this local joint. Chinese chicken salad and wontons. Nothing fancy unless you think wontons are fancy. So I'm waiting, right? The app says 30 minutes. Cool. But 45 minutes rolled by and my blood pressure was starting to rise. I call the driver and the guy picks up after like 7 rings. "What's taking so long?" I blurt out. There's this pause. I mean, long enough to make me wonder if he's even there. "Hello? Hello," I yell. Then he's like, "Who's this?" I'm shaking my head in utter disbelief. I tell him my name and remind him I'm the chick waiting on that Chinese chicken salad and wontons. "Ah, yes," he says. "I'm on my way." I hang up, relieved but still starving, and just a little less pissed. I sat in my living room with the TV on while creating a new song list on Spotify, dying for the delivery driver to just show up already. Just then my phone vibrated. It was the delivery guy. Breathing a sigh of relief that the food was finally here, I answered. Again, I had to say hello like 4 times before he started talking. He said he was outside with my delivery. "Sweet, be right there," I tell him. Still holding my phone, I crack open the door. There's no one there. My front yard's empty. Like, literally, I don't even have a plan out there. But more importantly, there's no delivery guy. I'm scanning up and down the street, and I'm like, where the hell is that f***tard? Momentarily forgetting I'm still on the phone with the guy, I hear him say, "I see you." His voice is all creepy, like he's enjoying this shit or something. Then he adds, "Aren't you a pretty young thing?" I'm like, what the f***? Thinking I've got some sick old pervert for a delivery driver. While enraged, I'm also freaking the hell out. I slam the door shut, lock it, and check the app. It says my food's been delivered. I mean, seriously. I kill the lights and go full-on commando mode. I'm moving from room to room, peeking through the curtains. I don't see anyone. I mean, he could have just left the food on the porch and driven away. Or maybe, just maybe, that freak is still out there. I start walking towards the front door when I hear it. A scrape or something coming from the backyard. I tipped-toed for some reason over to the window and cautiously pulled the curtain back. I didn't really expect to see anyone. But man, I couldn't have been more wrong. That delivery guy has parked his fat ass right on my back patio. He's just sitting there like some strung-out meth head, his tongue hanging out of his mouth. I quickly shut the curtain and took a half step back. That's when I feel my phone buzz. Guess who? It's the delivery guy. Shaking my head with equal parts rage and fear, I answer. Before I even say hello, he says, I just saw you at the window. I froze for a sec. Then before he could say another word, I screamed, "I'm calling the cops," and hung up. I stormed back into the living room and dialed 911. I tell them there's some pervert delivery driver in my yard who's harassing me and won't leave. They ask me a bunch of stupid questions until finally they say they're sending someone. Meanwhile, my phone's buzzing like it's possessed. Who do you think? I ignore it. I felt I had good locks on all the doors and windows, but still it was nerve-wracking. Eventually, there was a knock on the door, followed by a man shouting, "Police!" I sprint to the door, fling it open, and what do I see? It's not a cop. You guessed it. It's the delivery driver, dressed in grungy clothes and flashing a big grin full of missing and discolored teeth. I recoiled just from the stench. I almost vomited just looking at this guy. That's how gross he was. He then reaches for the screen door, and instinctively, I slam the front door as hard as possible. It bounces back open, having smashed his fingers between the door and the jamb. I hear him yell as I slam the door a second time. It closes, and I twist the deadbolt. He's screaming profanities and all the sick shit he wants to do to me as I stand breathless and shaking on the other side of the door. Meanwhile, he's banging his fist and kicking the door, yelling the whole time. I stood there in what was definitely the scariest few minutes of my life. I didn't realize it had gone silent until I heard footsteps heading towards my door. I peek through the drapes, and it's the real cops this time. The delivery driver, he's gone. Vanished. Oddly, they find his phone in the back on the patio table. Even more weird, the face on the phone isn't the guy I saw at the door. The face staring back at me is some pasty teenager with pimples and a curly mop of strawberry blonde hair. The guy at the door had been like 50 and looked like he'd been dragged out of the sewer to make deliveries. Even more oddly, they found my Chinese chicken salad and wontons next to the front door. The sick had made the delivery after all. Anyway, I told the police everything. They took their report and left. I threw the wontons in the microwave to heat them up. Then I sat down in the living room with a bottle of white wine to watch TV and eat my Chinese chicken salad. Despite all the crazy shit that went on that night, the salad and wontons were really good. A couple days later, I get a call from the cop who showed up that night. Turns out the guy at my house wasn't even the real delivery driver. This dude had jacked the real driver's phone mid-delivery or something. I really need to find a better area to live in.
Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.